today I'm going to be talking to you guys about the advanced air mobility domain. How many are familiar with advanced air mobility or urban air mobility? Oh, I got my work cut out for me. 1, 2. All right. Well, here we go. Okay, so advanced air mobility refers to a lot of different things. How many of you have heard in the news about some of the electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft? Okay, all right. So you guys, that is one of the cornerstones of advanced air mobility. You also hear the term urban air mobility. So advanced air mobility is comprised of several different components. One is working towards air taxis, where you have these small electrical vertical takeoff and landing aircraft that can move people within and around big cities. What about package delivery? You guys seen like some of the package delivery out in Texas Wing? They've got this field of drones and they deliver for Walmart and Amazon. That's part of advanced air mobility. And then you have regional air mobility, in which they're looking to move goods, medical, between kind of regional areas, like from here to Orlando to Tampa, that sort of thing. So the idea is faster, cleaner, safer movement of people and goods, and we're seeing a lot of changes in the aviation industry as there's a push for this. So one of the cool things about this is, so I've been doing research in aviation for over 20 years, and for a long time there was not a lot of like brand new, innovative, interesting things happening, small innovations, right? Over the last 5 years, there's been amazing advancements and really cool innovation going on. And part of that is because there's been billions of dollars poured into this. We've got Boeing's invested, some of the big tech firms like Amazon's. There's a lot of money being invested. Because of that, we're seeing really cool innovations, particularly in the aircraft realm. So as far as the passenger air taxis, you've probably heard of companies like Joby, Archer, Beta. They're developing electric vertical takeoff and landing aircraft with various different configurations that can make kind of short flights that are totally electric powered. We have Eve here in the area, so I don't know if no one from Eve here today, but they're right across the airport from us. As far as drone cargo, zipline, drone up, OA air, you're seeing drone delivery, whether it's packages, supplies. We're seeing it in the medical field. The ability to move things more quickly and more easily using drone technology. And with regional aircraft, beyond the electric vertical takeoff and landing, we're seeing hybrid aircraft that have a little bit more range. We're seeing money being put into hydrogen powered, so more sustainable sources of propulsion. So a lot going on in the aircraft landscape there. And so why does this matter for the Space Coast? So we're really unique. I mean, aerospace is part of our legacy, right? So we have the Kennedy Space Center here. We have tons of aerospace companies. Aerospace is kind of woven into the fabric of our being on the Space Coast. We're also really strategically located. So we have KSC, Orlando Airport, Melbourne Airport, Space Force Base, all within a very close kind of range. And we've got a lot of local aerospace companies that are investing in this, right? So we're kind of, the time is ripe and we're a great location because it's projected to have a serious economic impact, right? So Florida's aerospace industry generates over $19 billion annually. Aerospace is a huge part of our economics here on the Space Coast, and so this is an opportunity. It's funny, I haven't known a lot about SCATI, so being here and listening today, I'm like, I need to think about how I'm presenting this to you guys, because I think there are opportunities for a lot of you. So as far as economic development, this is going to be attracting this. So AAM is taking off across the country, no pun intended. But the states you're really seeing investing in are Florida, Texas, North Carolina, Ohio. I heard someone recently say Oklahoma, but I haven't really seen much about that. But Orlando Airport Authority, Tampa Airport Authority, Melbourne Airport Authority, they are investing in this industry, and there's going to be real opportunities. Companies are going to be moving to this area, seeking to get involved in it. There's going to be a diverse creation of job opportunities. In the press, you hear a lot about the pilot shortage, but pilots are only one kind of component of this, right? There's a huge workforce that goes into supporting something like this. Whether it's air traffic controllers, people on the ground, people developing the technology. So there's going to be a huge kind of workforce kind of development component necessary that's going to kind of fuel this growth. And because of that, there's going to need to be an education pipeline. So we're unique. We have Florida Tech here. We have Eastern Florida, UCF. So a lot of opportunity to develop that workforce. And so projected local impacts. So I have to say thank you to Chris Fernando, one of my partners in crime, who helped me develop these slides. Actually, I totally stole them from him. So I did not verify these numbers, but he did. 2,500 plus jobs over the next 5 years, $180 million in supply chain revenue, $12 million in workforce training investment, more than 15 companies establishing a regional presence because we're seeing this area growing. A lot of challenges to a company, as with all innovation, there's always challenges. One is regulation, right? So one thing about the aerospace industry is we're very safe. The FAA has a certification process. They certify aircraft, they certify pilots to ensure that the highest safety standard in aviation. We still don't know how to do this for a lot of the aircraft, right? So certification, there's probably anyone in the room involved in the certification process? No? Okay. All right, so if I say anything wrong, you don't know? Kidding. The idea behind the certification process is that you test an aircraft and you can with confidence say that in all these predicted situations it's going to operate safely. A lot of the new technology is integrating AI, machine learning based algorithms that are learning enabled, so it's not a static design. It's not deterministic. So you don't know all the situations it's going to encounter, you don't know how it's going to react to all of those. So the FAA is still trying to develop a process to certify something like that. We've got a grant from NASA where we're going to be looking at this, me and one of the professors from the computer science department and a bunch of other schools, so big challenge. Infrastructure planning. So there's a lot of new infrastructure needed to support these aircraft. So electrification is one of them. Florida Tech has a Pipistrel, which is electric aircraft that we've done some research, the flight test department, and we had to do these short flights to and from the Melbourne airport because there's no other airports in the area that provide charging capabilities, right? So vertiport development with those charging facilities, there's a big need there. And so just sitting at the table, some of you guys, you do kind of some of the techie stuff, parts, like there's going to be opportunities here. Community acceptance is big, right? These aircraft are going to be flying at very low altitudes and there's going to be noise, right? So how many people flying around, there's a drone like flying around, you're trying to watch something, oh, that's annoying, so imagine that on a larger scale, right? So privacy, noise, safety issues, so having the community buy-in is a big issue as well. But there's a lot of benefits. Emergency response, so hurricane relief. So these aircraft can vertically take off and land, get to places that traditional aircraft can't. Hello? Oh, that's turned off. Vertically. They're much cheaper than helicopters as far as operations, right? So medical as well. They can, whether it's moving people between hospitals or delivering medication or organs, that sort of thing. There's opportunities for to help in the medical field. And just economic growth, right? So the ability driving needs in the area, needs in the industry, where we can provide folks like you guys opportunities to move in and have new business. Okay, so where does Florida Tech come into play? So we are involved in the AM industry in a few different ways. One is education. So we developed a 4-course series that I'm going to talk a little bit about later, but right now there aren't degrees in this, there aren't people who are experienced. There's most of the people who are experts in this area, it's like on-the-job training. It's because they've been with these companies, right? So you can't go get a degree in this. We developed a 4-course series that's designed to, and it's online, I'll talk a little bit about it later, but it's designed to take people who have the aerospace engineering degree, the computer science degree, the aeronautics degree, and they have those skill sets, and provide them enough underlying knowledge of the AM industry that they can take their skills and apply within them. We also have been building partnerships. So my lab has partnerships with a lot of the OEMs. We have some MOUs in place, with the idea that, can we work with these developers to ensure that they can leverage kind of our science and technology capabilities and expertise to make sure that, they're on the cutting edge. So as far as research, so my lab is the Atlas Lab, which I'm going to talk to you about some of the science later. Hopefully you'll enjoy it. So recently myself and Dr. Sid Bhattacharya, who's a computer science professor, were awarded a NASA University Leadership Initiative. So it's a $6 million 3-year grant in which we're working with a conglomerate of other universities and tech companies like Collins Aerospace and Resilience to look at this problem of how do you certify these learning-enabled aircraft to ensure that they're trustworthy and that the humans interacting with them will trust them and rely upon them. And so there's other areas. There's an autonomy lab I know is doing some of this work. We have an electric aircraft. We've been doing some research. The flight test program was doing some research looking at, kind of the performance of electric batteries. Still got a ways to go before they're going to be competing as far as energy density with traditional fuel. And then workforce training. So we have a flight line. For those of you who don't know, Florida Tech has a flight school. So we have, 500-600 pilots who are in various stages of the training. So right now we're focused on conventional commercial certification, but as we move towards these new kind of type certificates, type ratings that are going to be needed for these new aircraft, we hope to play a role kind of in that workforce development. Okay, so I'm going to tell you a little bit about our 4-course series on AAM. So if you are interested in moving into this industry, this is an opportunity to help with this. And so I would probably get in trouble for having that word certificate program up here because it's not one yet, but I'm proposing it this semester and hopefully in the calendar year academic year 26, 27, it will be an official certificate program. But we currently have 4 courses. And again, these courses, they're intro level. They're designed to bring someone up to speed on the industry and be able to apply the skills and knowledge they have from their bachelor's degree, master's degree in the AAM domain. They are online and they are asynchronous. So they are designed such that not only can our students take them, either upper level undergraduate or graduate students, but they can also be taken by folks in industry, right? So the asynchronous meaning you can do the work in the evenings, on the weekends, that you can access. They're not classes you attend, there's recordings, so you can access it at your leisure. Okay, so the first course is an ecosystem course. So it's a basic introduction to all things AAM. So the aircraft, the onboard technology, airspace, infrastructure, regulatory environment, different human factors, considerations, and how these kind of are impacting the emerging market. AB 2522 is infrastructure. So all things infrastructure. So this is vertiport development, site planning, airspace access, environmental considerations, land use, electrification, energy infrastructure. So everything needed to bring in and kind of build the infrastructure for these aircraft. The third course is a vehicle design considerations course. This isn't a design course, it's actually to learn about the different aspects of design and what needs to be considered. So the different vehicle configurations, there's a lot of different ones. Vector thrust, tilt rotors, that sort of thing. And all the enabling technology to allow this to work. We'll talk about the different missions, performance, human factors considerations. There's a lot on electric propulsion system, which is very novel, and the batteries being used. Autonomy, a lot of these aircraft are designed to eventually be fully autonomous, and how those will be certified, how the pilots will be certified, the different interfaces and training. And then ride quality and cabin design from kind of a passenger experience perspective. And then finally, a legal and environmental frameworks course, which looks at the legal challenges, regulatory challenges, legal precedents, both internationally and domestic, safety management systems, airspace integration, liability, environmental impacts, noise, and then urban planning considerations. So the idea is you could do this over the course of 2 years, 1 year, depending on how much time you put in, and come up with, hopefully eventually next year, a certificate in AAM that could be used with your degree to kind of be able to move into this industry. And so I usually put this out on LinkedIn, like when registration comes up. So I'll try and figure out a way I can maybe get SCATI to help kind of promote that, so you can look, if you're looking to get involved in one of these classes, and the process for that. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about my lab and the research we do in advanced air mobility. So my lab, I usually have about 10 to 12 grad students and undergrads working for me. I have some faculty that collaborate, but usually PhD students, masters and undergrad. I also have, so how do you know that Florida Tech now has a med school on campus? So we have, Burrell Medical School, which is located in New Mexico, has a satellite campus. And so some of the work I do, we leverage physiological measures to get at unobservable aspects of performance. And so I have a med student who is interested in getting involved, and so she's supporting some of that, which has been really cool. So these are the different areas in which we research. I tell people I am half engineer, half psychologist. My husband always kids, I'm doing experiments on him. But we study the interface between the man and the machine, right? So the human and the machine, right? So how people process it, and cognition is really my specialty. How do people process information? How do they maintain situational awareness, make decisions, and how can we design systems and train them so they can do that more effectively? And so these are the different areas I do research in. Human Human autonomy teaming is one that I do a lot of right now. I'm going to share some kind of cool results with you today. Interface design, whether it's in the panel or ground control station, which are going to be controlling multiple drones. We do VR, AR work, lots of training stuff. So how do you assess expertise? How do you adapt training so you can accelerate learning? And we utilize the cognitive, behavioral, and physiological measures to get out this eye tracking, heart rate variability, that sort of thing. Cognition, decision making, how we make decisions under stress, how can we make decisions under uncertainty, and we look at human factors of cybersecurity as well. In all this, we consider individual differences and how that affects human performance, right? So whether it's cognitive ability, motivation, personality, how do these come into play and impact how a human performs in a specific situation? And so I researched these in all areas of aviation, doing a lot of work in AM right now, but I've done commercial and military aviation, as well as UAS, a little bit in maintenance and ATC. But any complex system I'll study. So my lab is located out by the airport, so out right across the street from the flight line, actually right next door to Northrop Grumman's down by the tower. We have a large collaborative space, data collection room, so I'm a minimalist, so like most of what I do are simulation studies. So we bring people in, put them through some aircraft simulations, UAS simulations, and study different things. So we're right across from the flight line, so Florida Tech has almost 50 aircraft, a huge offering of different simulators to help support the training. We have a large US high bay, like this room, where we can fly drones inside. We also have collaboration with Pompeii, actually, where they let us use what we're not supposed to call the compound. I don't know if they call it now. But we still call that. Right, where the students can dove down, it's outside of controlled airspace, and fly the drone missions. Okay, so some things that are unique about my lab. So I'm not your traditional academic. I did not work in a lab when I was working my PhD. I worked in industry. So I worked for Boeing for a couple of years. I worked for a consulting firm in Orlando called Design Interactive, and worked on my PhD throughout. So my PhD was funded by the Navy, the Office of Naval Research. That's what ONR stands for, by the way. Should spell out those acronyms. And so it was much less of a lab experience and much more of applied research experience. And that's kind of how I run my lab. I run my lab as a cross between a small business and a family. And so we stay very connected to industry. So I have connections at most of the OEMs. I even have students who are like running human factors departments now, both at Archer and at, I don't have them up there, oh my goodness, at Beta, at Archer and Beta. But so we try to stay very plugged in, so we have a finger on the pulse of kind of their needs to make sure that the research we're doing isn't just done in a vacuum, that we're studying things that are relevant to the industry and helping them meet their needs. We work with local agencies, so we've done some work with Ocean Rescue on some of our drone work. Eisen has been great. Again, unique expertise in these areas. And some of the really, we have unique test beds. One of the really unique things we have access to are just participants. So like, I'm studying pilots. A lot of research you see published, they just use kind of undergraduate students. We have undergraduate pilots, but we have pilots that range all the way up to very expert certified flight instructors, so we can use them as participants. And we have super active alumni, so I have reaches into all the different airlines, the different kind of companies that play in the aviation industry, which has been really helpful. So, connections, I have those if you need help with that. Okay, so now I'm going to talk a little bit about the research. So this is probably maybe a little different than some of the talks you see, because I'm a scientist, I love science, so hopefully this will get you kind of intrigued and interested in some of the science that's behind this industry. So there's kind of 4 areas in which we're really doing research, and one which I think we're going to be moving into. The first is automation. So traditionally, aviation of the aircraft, even conventional aircraft now, has a great deal of automation. And a lot of research has gone into ensuring that the pilot can effectively interact with automation and understand what's going on, what it's doing, and why. And we're still seeing issues, right? So like all the Boeing 737 MAX crashes, those were an issue with automation, and the pilot's interpreting what automation is doing. The aircraft that are going to be used in advanced air mobility contain a significantly greater amount of autonomy in some cases, right? So we're only going to see this magnified. So we need to study and understand, like, how do humans interact with this? What is that interaction going to look like? And how do we ensure that the human operators, whether they're on the aircraft or in the ground for the automated aircraft, know what the automation is doing and why, and when they need to jump in. Pilot interfaces. So there's been decades of research into the best way to present information to the pilots so they understand what's going on, what they need to do next. There's a lot of changes in the pilot interfaces in these aircraft. They're going from dual stations where you have 2 control stations to 1. They're simplifying displays, getting rid of redundant information. They're unifying the controls so the axes will be decoupled. And so a lot of changes. So we need to understand, we need to make sure that we're designing that in a way that the pilot's going to be able to effectively operate it and be able to shift from the mental model they have of conventional aircraft controls to this kind of novel situation. Training. So right now, there's training is, whether it's your ab initio training at our flight line or out at the airlines, it's been in a not a static state, but there have been kind of core training objectives that have been the focus for a long time. The missions have not changed a great deal. We're seeing huge changes in the type of missions that pilots can be flying. So they're going to be flying at very low altitudes, around terrain, around buildings where there's mechanical turbulence, and these are areas that they're typically trained to avoid. And so, what are the implications for training? How do we ensure that we train them to effectively operate in this kind of novel situation? And then just the concept of operations. So not only are they being trained to flying, in these areas that are low altitude around buildings that they're typically trained to avoid, that's going to be higher stress, higher workload. They're also doing a lot of short flights, right? Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. So as opposed to maybe doing longer haul flights, well, that means they're spending the majority of their day in these really high stress, high workload operations. What are the impacts to fatigue? What are the impacts to stress and workload? So those need to be studied and understood. And the last part of it is, and we haven't done any work yet, but this is an area that we're looking to move into, is passenger ride quality. So we're all used to our cushy little airliners, right? Oh, a little turbulence, let's increase the altitude low, we don't want it to be bumpy. Some of these flight trajectories that they're predicting are not going to be fun. And I'm curious to see where the testing goes, right? Turbulence, acceleration forces, these are not going to be you're not going to be drinking your coffee without a cup, without a top on it, right? So what are the implications? Are people going to be willing to fly on that? How are they going to tolerate it? Are they going to get sick? So lots of interesting research questions there. And so now what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a little peek into some of the research we're doing, hopefully at a level that you guys can understand and enjoy. Okay, so this is actually a study that is being conducted by one of my dissertation students. This is her dissertation. She's literally, she just made these this week. We're just digging into the data, and she is looking at what is the difference in the semi-automated versus highly automated interaction on the aircraft. So her low levels of autonomy are kind of similar to what we see on aircraft today, where you have an autopilot. So the autopilot's flying the plane, but the human operator, the pilot, is still making decision engaged and does have some control input. Versus a highly automated aircraft, in which the autonomy is flying the aircraft and the human is just sitting there and monitoring. And it's only supposed to jump in if they think something's going wrong, right? Very different kind of situations. This is what we're going to see in the future. And so she's put people in these different simulation scenarios in our simulator, and then she puts them in these flights, and then puts an event where either a normal event, like a weather event where you have to go around, or an off-normal event where I've got a lot of students, I'm trying to remember what her event is. I'm going to say there's a foreign object debris on the runway, or something happens and the clearance is canceled, and the autonomy is supposed to make a decision to go around, right, and doesn't. And so she studied in these two situations. We collected eye tracking data. So is there a difference in what the pilots are looking at in these two situations? Is there a difference in what they're perceiving and comprehending situation awareness-wise? And is there a difference in their workload and the decisions they make? And so we found some really interesting data. Let's see if I can get, does that have a pointer?
Yes.
Aha, okay. All right. So up top, this is the highly automated, and so this is the semi-automated. So this is where the AI is kind of flying the aircraft. And so these are heat maps that represent allocation of visual attention, so what they're looking at basically. Green means they looked at it a little, red means they looked at it a lot. And so there's some interesting differences between these. When the human is more intimately involved in flying the aircraft, they're spending more time looking, sorry, that's down here. They're spending more time kind of looking at the orbital horizon, the attitude indicators, a little bit on the airspeed and altitude. But when you go to this highly automated, now you see much less allocation of attention kind of on this artificial horizon, much more on kind of your altitude. And we even start to see now they're paying attention to both the flight plan and the moving map. And so you don't see that down here at all. So that suggests to us that so these guys have a little more capacity to monitor things that the individual who's more engaged in flying the aircraft doesn't, right? We also found that in the semi-automated condition, the pilots had greater levels of level 1 SA, which is perception. They had a greater awareness of kind of the state of the aircraft. And they had quicker decision times because they were kind of more intimately involved. However, the highly automated condition had lower workload. Obviously, they're not having to fly the aircraft, right? But what we also found was some really interesting interactions in that when there was, so these are, I don't know if you can see this, blue is nominal, red's off nominal. So in a nominal situation, we actually found that the highly automated had better comprehension, level 2 SA, kind of understood what, not only the state of the aircraft, but kind of what it meant for that situation. But and much greater than the semi-automated, but when they were in an off-nominal situation, those differences kind of disappeared. Another interesting finding was that in the semi-automated condition, this is projection, your ability to project what's going to happen next. It doesn't really matter whether you're in off-nominal or nominal. When you're in that semi-automated condition, you have about the same ability to do that. However, in the highly automated condition, when it's a nominal situation, you have a great deal of ability to predict. But when you get to a off-nominal situation, you can no longer predict what's going to happen in the future. And so we think what we're seeing these interesting interactions are, there's kind of a trade-off between workload. So when the autonomy is flying the aircraft, you have a lot more spare capacity to do something. However, when something goes wrong, you're behind the power curve because you don't really know the state of the aircraft, right? And so all of a sudden, everything goes to hell because you don't know what's going on.
Oh my God.
So,
My question, did you do one with no automation, where the pilot's flying the whole thing?
we did not do a manual control. So, but I mean, there has been a lot of research that looked at manual versus semi-automated, and actually a slide, something similar I'm going to talk about, and you see the same thing. So typically what you see in automation research is that when there's no automation, totally manual control to human, it's high workload, right? So the pilot kind of can't keep up, a lot of errors. For really high levels of automation, you see complacency. So, oh yeah, it's flying the aircraft. Then if the automation messes up, the pilot doesn't detect it. And so the sweet spot actually is kind of moderate levels of automation in which you have help from the automation, but you're still engaged. So if something goes wrong, you're not behind the power curve. So that's kind of typically what you see. And that's actually what we found. And so we did some studies looking at human autonomy teaming. And the top one, this was actually a participant who was working with 4 drones. And so they were doing a ISR mission, surveillance, reconnaissance mission, in which they had 4 drones that were going ahead of them and taking pictures and helping them identify targets and classify them as civilian, enemy, and then they had to classify them and mark them so someone come in and so they could identify actually the safest route to go down. And then we had a manual condition in which the drones just took pictures and the human did all the kind of assessment, classification, confirmation, all the way up to highly automated in which the human didn't do anything, they just had veto power. And then you had some kind of in-between where they were involved. And this is exactly what we found. In the manual condition, the workload was too high, the human couldn't keep up when they had to do everything. In the highly automated condition, they kind of lost the picture, and we saw complacency, and the drones weren't 100% reliable, so when they messed up, the human didn't detect it because they weren't really double checking. And the sweet spot was this kind of middle ground where you're engaged in the task, but you have support, so you're not doing it all yourself. the research project I'm going to talk to you a little more about today is one we just finished up for the Air Force Office of Scientific Research. That was AFOSR, one of my acronyms. And so we were interested in looking at what happens when you interact not just with one autonomous agent, so like one aircraft, but what happens when you're working with a team of autonomous agents. And this is where like the military's going. And so we created a simulation test bed in which one human would be working with two sub-teams, each had a drone and a ground robot, to do a search and rescue mission. And you and each of your teammates had specialized roles such that you had to depend on each other and call on each other. And we were interested to see if one of those agents messes up, how does it impact your trust in them, and does it spill over to other agents? And so we did a study and a simulation, and what we found was, well, so first we just looked at what happens when that agent commits a violation, we called it. So in this case, you're all clearing your routes. The human is the only one who can defuse an ID. So the agents are calling on you to defuse it. You're calling on them to help you search. And an ID explodes. So one of the agents has missed an ID along his route. It explodes and it killed civilians. You have civilian casualties. And so in that case, when it happens one time, you see this kind of small reduction in trust. So they're reporting their trust in all the agents every 10 minutes is an hour-long mission. Small drop in trust, but it rebounds very quickly to pre-violation levels, so they recover. So trust was pretty resilient. Am I standing too close to something? Am I? Okay,
You're good.
Okay.
I think it's on speed.
I'm supposed to stay in a certain area, and I forgot. Okay, and so, however, when there's two violations in a row, back to back, boom, boom, double whammy, you see the trust reduces and does not recover. You do not see the bounce back. So you kind of fool me once, don't fool me twice, right? And we also found that the later in the mission that violation happened, the greater the loss in trust. It wasn't, however, because you dropped to lower levels. It was because the farther you went in the mission, the more trust you had to lose. So, good interactions, they're working, they're doing great, trust, and then boom, at the end of the mission you have a lot to lose. And what we found is there was like this threshold, whether it was early, mid, or late mission, your trust dropped to the same kind of moderate level, regardless of where it started. So that was kind of interesting. Okay, we also found a spillover effect, right? So we were interested, if one agent commits a violation, does that impact your trust in the other agents? And so what we did was we took the double whammy phenomenon. So we had an agent always committed a violation, they missed an ID, exploded, killed civilians, and then there was a secondary one kind of back to back a few minutes later in which they missed another ID and it blew up and it killed like some of your friendly units. And what we did was we varied which agent did the second violation. So it was either the same agent did two violations in a row, the second violation was the same type of agent on a different team, or a different type of agent on the same team as a violator, or a totally different type of agent on a totally different team. So just to kind of illustrate, so these are our teams, right? You have a sub-team with a ground robot and a drone, and a second sub-team with a ground robot and a drone. And so B1 is the first violation, B2 is the second. So what we found was that anytime an agent missed the ID, you lost your trust in them, but mostly no one else. There was only one situation in which your trust loss in that agent spilled over to another agent, and that was in this unique situation in which the two agents that committed violations had nothing in common. There were different types on different teams. And then it spilled over to the agent which shared a commonality with both of them. And so we're calling this the adjacency effect. It's kind of that guilty by association, right? You're like, well, now a drone's messed up and a ground robot, two totally different teams. So now it kind of makes you question the whole kind of package, kind of that system-wide trust effect. So that was really interesting. So we're also looking at, around the time, will be times for questions. Interfaces. So a lot of these electrical vertical takeoff and landing aircraft are battery powered. A big part of mission planning called decision making is fuel management, right? So do I have enough fuel to get where I need to go? Do I have enough fuel if there's a contingency? So managing fuel is an important part. Managing battery power is very different. How many of you guys would like to plan an airplane mission based on the little battery indicator on your phone? like, oh, I got 50%. I got no, what happened? Right? So how do you present information? And so what we did was we looked at the literature, we did a review of all the kind of interfaces that are being used right now by Pipistrel and Beta, and we worked with eVTOL test pilots and propulsion engineers to kind of come up with some ideas for what are ways you can improve the way this is presented. And so, example, this is kind of the baseline state of energy. So this is kind of like your phone, right? The percentage. Adding limit lines, they're not supposed to drop below 20%. This is kind of 40%, as well as this caret that predicts. At any point in time, it's kind of predicting where you're going to be at landing, right? So you kind of know how you need to change. These aircraft, the slightest change in how you're flying can impact your battery power, right? So if you have to hover a little longer, you're drawing power at a higher rate. And so you're going to be able to not go as far if you end up hovering more. We also introduced the idea of range rings that were associated with either your ability to conduct a conventional landing or vertical landing, right? So if you can land on your wing, that takes much less energy. But if you're going to have to hover and do a vertical landing, that's an extremely high energy draw. So knowing how far you can go based on what type of landing you're going to take is really important. And then battery temperature. So temperature is not something that has been as critical in conventional aircraft. Now it is, right? Because the temperature of the battery affects your performance, affects the state of energy, and it's a huge safety concern if you have a thermal runaway, right? Your batteries and these are huge batteries in this aircraft, they can catch on fire. So being aware of kind of the state of your battery temperature. And so what we did was we created scenarios in our simulator and made little vignette video scenarios, and I've got one to kind of show you here. On this next, let's see if I can get it to play. I had to begin will it play? Okay, so this is actually kind of a mock-up. So we recorded in our simulator the PFD, and then we had for these displays, these were kind of mocked up and correlated. So we were able to send this out on a survey to a bunch of different pilots, eVTOL pilots, test pilots, as well as just conventional pilots. And we'd frame a situation. We'd say, this is what's happening. There's a trying to think of one of the ones. You've got to fly from here to there. This is how much charge you have. You've encountered a headwind. Are you going to have time to get there? And so we presented some pilots with the baseline and some pilots with these novel displays. And we found that in some of the scenarios, especially the ability to kind of predict where you're going to be landing, whether you need to turn around, do use one of contingencies, led to increased situation awareness and led to less risky decisions. So kind of some cool stuff we've got going on. All right, and then the last thing, I'm going to talk about training. So one of the other studies that we're doing, this is another dissertation. So I spoke earlier about how now pilots are going to be spending the majority of their flight in these kind of high stress, high workload situations. So they need to be able to train for that, right? And there's a lot of talk in the industry about reduced training requirements and using more simulator time. So we're looking at how can you train these pilots to operate effectively under stress? And so can you utilize VR training and elements of emotional story to induce high levels of stress and workload during training so they can kind of be prepared to make decisions in those situations when they're on the actual aircraft. So this student is going to put people in different training scenarios, which there's some, you're delivering an organ, there's a little girl who's dying, and can you get there? And you have to make a kind of a risky decision, but they're either going to get that on a desktop or in a VR simulator where they're totally immersed, and they're going to either have a really emotional story tied to it, like a background story, like see a trailer and like, no, you gotta get this kid, or nothing at all, and see, what are the impacts? Does it increase kind of the stress and emotions experienced to be in the VR? What about to hear the story and what happens if you put them together? Is there some additive benefit? So, kind of another cool one that we're doing. So I think that's it for my research. Okay, so that's just kind of the fun science. That's where I like to play. But as going back to kind of the AM industry. So right now we're kind of still in that foundation building, right? So there's pilot programs. I don't know if you keep up with like the rulemaking part 108 that just came out. So there's can be some pilot programs. This is a big testing phase. In the next 5 years, I think what you're going to see is now vertiports start to roll out. You're going to see more substantial technology develop. Things are going to start to get certified. And really, we're talking 10 years out really before you see kind of full kind of efforts as far as AM networks and integration into, you know, the national airspace system. So, it's sort of a call to action, right? So it's a very exciting new industry. There's going to be a lot of needs for a lot of your different services, right? So, you know, I encourage you to look for partnership opportunities. There's a lot of local airspace companies who are playing in this space. You know, are there workforce initiatives that you can engage with to ensure that you're helping build the skills that are going to support this? And, you know, leadership, right? There might be leadership opportunities as well. So with that, you know, I encourage you to kind of track it, look at, it's in the news a lot, you know, see what's going on in the local area, get involved. And with that, and reach out to me because I would be happy to help, you know, connect you with, you know, the network that I have. So with that, I'll take questions.